Okay, as you can see, we're going to start off September with Ferris Bueller versus Charlie Bartlett. Charlie Bartlett being represented here today by this four-pack of Downey movies, which is pretty much the only way I found it many years ago. But this one I was a little hesitant to do because it is going to be one of those cases, I'm just going to say up front, where it's going to be pretty one-sided because Charlie Bartlett came out in 2008. I think he did the festival run in 2007, and then came out in 2008 to very little fanfare. And I saw it. I've seen it. I didn't see it in theaters, but I saw it a few times over the years. And Ferris Bueller, I've basically know front to back. It basically, I could talk about Ferris Bueller in my sleep. I've known it for as long as I think I have memories. So I do want to try to go back and forth on this and really talk about why both movies really work and how they work in kind of the same ways and also kind of different ways. And about this, two rebellious characters in school, one who has to sort of rise to popularity and one who's just kind of already there. And I kind of like to look at Charlie Bartlett as what Ferris Bueller might be once he's like at his height of popularity. Probably what Ferris Bueller is like if we ever actually got to see him in school, where we just kind of see that there's almost kind of a mythology around what he's actually like in school because we never actually see it. So this is kind of why I kind of wanted to talk about these two together. But yeah, I'm also trying to do it to where I'm not. It isn't as far as like the versus thing goes. It's Ferris Bueller just stomping Charlie Bartlett into the ground. Like I said, it's just me coming from a place where I know one significantly better than I know the other, and there's probably going to be cuts in this also. I don't typically do the cutting if I'm doing just the versus thing, but these notes that I have in front of me are just so all over the damn place, and a lot of them are Ferris Bueller. I could write a novella on Ferris Bueller, I think, and my Ferris Bueller notes are actually spilling into my Charlie Bartlett notes. Like, that's that's how one-sided it might feel, but I do want to throw a lot of appreciation to Charlie Bartlett as well as we go through this. So I think we can get started. So I guess the first thing we can talk about here is talking about, talent and life that was gone too soon. Let's just kind of talk about how amazing Anton Yelchin is in this and how much he really carries the movie and shows how worthy he is of being the title character. What's interesting about this character especially is this is a character that could be where Ferris kind of has this instant likability and this sort of instant access to the audience, especially with the fourth wall breaking. Like, as soon as Ferris sits up in bed and it says written and directed by John Hughes, and he looks into the camera and says they bought it, and that's the audience's clue, oh shit, we're in on this, we're like right in this with him, and he's acknowledging us. That's pretty much all it takes for Ferris to have the audience around his finger, and then that just kind of goes from the very start. We're just as much around his finger as his parents are, and that's a lot. Whereas Charlie has to kind of earn his likability and kind of win the audience over. So, with Ferris, we just kind of accept that, but here it's kind of like, is this guy going to be kind of obnoxious? Is he going to be maybe unlikable? Is he, as far as, the character having a lot of baggage, is that going to play a part in how, we feel about this character? And it's pretty quick that even though it sets up that he maybe has done some unsavory things in school and he's being expelled in the opening scene, that might set a tone, but Anton Yelchin just kind of really had this instant likability about him, where it was you look at him and his characters and you think, if this guy has done something wrong, there might have possibly been a reason. Let's hear him out. That's what you think when you see Anton Yelchin in pretty much anything, especially this. And then, as we see him sort of open up more, he's this hugely energetic character, and that's something that's really it's in dangerous territory to go into obnoxious and annoying and stuff like that. But he never gets to that point because it does feel like, even when we just see the relationship with his mom, with Hope Davis, and of course they had practice playing mother and son because they were mother and son in Hearts in Atlantis 6 or 7 years before this. So seeing them reunite is nice, and also, and she's kind of playing a bit of a distant mother again. Like we kind of, I mean, they seem close, but they're both kind of each other's enablers, and so you get the sense that this is probably a good relationship he has with his mom, but maybe not a healthy one for either one of them. And then there's the whole missing dad aspect with him being in prison and stuff like that. But yeah, despite this, as soon as he goes into like this energetic territory, we can pretty much tell where it's coming from. Like the one of the opening scenes when he's on the way home after getting expelled, he talks about how people were just starting to like me, and it's like you do get the sense, and it is a running theme through the movie, which is he it it's clear to him that he has to do certain things to be liked, and how that might be like maybe he knows he's not being liked in like he would want to be liked in a natural way, you would think, but just being liked for pretty much anything, like even if it's for just doing things for people, he's willing to take that as long as he's well liked and as long as he's popular. It also makes it very easy to see how many insecurities lie in him, like not just, this kind of desperation to be accepted and popular, but also stuff like, even stuff that's funny, like when we see him brushing his teeth in the mirror and he's practicing how he's going to intimidate Murph and stuff like that and recruit him. And it really humanizes him and really makes you understand where he's coming from. But I also like the fact that the movie is funny about, his energetic nature and what he does to sort of cover up his insecurities and stuff like that. Where it knows when to be a drama and it knows when to be a comedy. And Yelchin's performance knows exactly, he knew exactly which notes to hit. As the movie went on for this character. So that comes through really well. Another thing that helps this character sort of come out is the character of Susan, Kat Dennings, where this love story is going to form. And typically it'd be like, oh, another young love story. I aggressively don't care, usually. Even when you look at, as great as Ferris Bueller is, that's one of the things that it doesn't really get into much, is Sloane's character in their relationship, where it's just kind of, it almost seems like it's kind of in the background. And it's like Sloane is a good like sort of third person to have throughout the day, but it's like I said, as far as their relationship goes, and as far as how she like motivates Ferris at all, like it's mostly just kind of her participating, like the scene where she's on the phone in the restaurant and stuff like that. But it's clear, even though she's a good third character for them, and she does kind of have a bit more of a grounded nature to her, and this sort of comfort she has with both Ferris and Cameron, there is something there and makes it this nice sort of trifecta. But here, the way Susan and Charlie interact is a whole important portion of the movie, and as far as like him winning Susan over, he's like that. I feel like when he wins Susan over is kind of when he wins the audience over, also with this very over the top audition, and so like it almost feels like we're kind of in her point of view as far as how we feel about him, and so and the way that eventually clashes with how Downey feels about him makes sense also, and how the audience would feel similar to that also as far as from Susan's perspective. So the thing about this also is that typically it's like when you see young love stories in movies like this, they're just kind of there, they're just kind of filler, but like I said, it's the development that you can see with both characters and the fact that it doesn't feel false, it doesn't feel like it's just there to be there. You can actually feel them sort of fall in love with each other, which actually feels pretty rare for characters that are like this age. Where like when they're sitting at the piano and like she gives him that look, or the moment that really stands out to me, because it's so real but it's so small that most people probably don't even see it or really think to acknowledge it. After the dance and he's handed out all the drugs for the first time and the dance goes crazy, and then when he walks back into school he's popular and everybody's like acknowledging him while everybody's like going crazy as he's walking down the hallway. Susan's there and like waves at him without raising her hand, and it's just this little small like note of affection, stuff like that makes this relationship feel really real. And then, like I said, you do have moments like where they're sitting at the piano and stuff like that. But like the moment when he breaks out into Yankee Doodle Dandy is another one of those cases where obviously he's using it as like an avoidance thing, but because his dad has come up, but it's also one of those things where the character could be in danger of being seen as obnoxious. But the thing about it is, not only does it seem like this moment that would make her like him even more, not just like him even more, but be more intrigued by him and more interested in what his life is and what the more intimate parts of his life are that he doesn't discuss with anybody. But also, it just because Yelchin did this kind of stuff so naturally, it also just feels like it would be an improvised moment. Like it just feels like spontaneous in the way that it would be in like a real life situation, especially if somebody was trying to avoid talking about something. So, I said there's a lot of stuff here that like really was on that line where does this work or doesn't it? And Yelchin especially is always able to make it fall on the right side, and I think Kat Dennings especially really gives a lot of support to that, and also really helps that get to the right place. And like just in general, I just had a really big crush on Kat Dennings after this movie. It came out, I think it came out the same year as Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, and those two movies together made me just insane for Kat Dennings for a little bit. So, and like I was saying when we started, another thing that I find interesting about thinking about Charlie Bartlett when I think about Ferris Bueller is having to see Charlie's rise to popularity like that. And it's like, and you see where Ferris is just already at that point when the movie starts. Like I said, to this almost mythical status. And when I think about these two together, it makes me wonder, like, what did Ferris have to climb to popularity, or is that something that just did it happen at a very early age and just carried over? Is like when he was in like his first year of high school, was he popular, or did he have to? It's a question that I love isn't really answered and doesn't have a background, but I like the fact that we can think about it, which is great. As far as like we kind of talked about the relationship with the parents here, and like talking about the way Charlie and Susan kind of relate to each other about being distant to parents and having one parent that ditched them and another that stayed and basically lost their mind, and Charlie doesn't realize, or she doesn't realize how much she's relating to Charlie in this moment because she doesn't know his full story yet. And so I like the way that plays out and kind of makes them stronger also. As far as the parental relationships in Ferris, like we talked about here, they basically just worship him. So I feel like it's more interesting to compare his relationship with his parents to seeing Cameron and how because we kind of see how there's kind of an opposite thing going where Charlie and Susan kind of have the same relationships with their parents. You look at like Ferris and Cameron, and they have also two different sets of parents and different kinds of relationships. They're completely on other planets, where Ferris is worshipped by his parents and Cameron is seemingly anything but. Where the dad loves the car more and loves possessions more than he will ever love Cameron, and that's established without his dad ever even being seen. And that's really strong. Also, we'll actually get a lot more into Cameron. But another thing I wanted to point out about Ferris, we were talking about Charlie's insecurities and how you don't really see that much in Ferris, but there's just enough to make him human. Because it's almost like he's this sort of there's a theory about Ferris Bueller that we'll get into that I don't subscribe to, but yeah, you could say that it's almost completely unreal. Just kind of how successful Ferris is and everything that he does. But there are these moments that come through, like even though he goes through the movie where the idea of consequences just barely don't even really come to mind for him. They're possible, but they're unlikely enough that he's able to just do whatever he wants to do and he'll get away with it. And then when we have this moment after Cameron has killed the car and Ferris offers to take the fall for it, and it's like, even though it's a serious moment and Ferris is clearly distressed enough that he knows if he takes the fall for Cameron, it's gonna be bad for him. But it was probably easier for him to offer to take the fall than it would be for anybody else. But there's also this moment that I love where just when he gets to the house at the end, right before he's about to go inside and he's made it, and he runs into Rooney outside, and we actually, for the first time, see Ferris, like, genuinely scared. And I love the fact that it's the first time, the first and only time he and Rooney have a scene together, and Ferris doesn't even say anything in this scene. Like, that's how terrified he is of running into Rooney. And the way it's almost kind of been, their relationship has kind of been built up to this point. Like, the only other interaction they have is on the phone. And it's the reverse of this, because in that phone interaction, Rooney never says a word. So I love that it's the reverse when they're actually in person, and it's Ferris that's scared into not speaking. Cause that's another reason Rooney didn't talk in the phone scene, is he was petrified out of his mind. So I love seeing those relationships also, and how much clearer they are. But like I said, as far as like the love story goes, the Charlie Susan love story is such a huge part of this movie, and really this movie's heart. Whereas, you know, Sloane is a nice character to have here, but, you know, not near the impact that Susan leaves, and their relationship in general. Okay, now, one thing I really want to get into here, because it's probably the thing that I'm the most passionate about when it comes to Ferris Bueller, is when you look at Charlie Bartlett, or really if you look at both the movie's titles, you'll see something different, which is Charlie Bartlett's just called Charlie Bartlett. So it makes sense if it doesn't have as much of a focus on like its side characters, because the movie is about Charlie Bartlett. Something might contradict that, we'll talk about in a little bit, but when you look at Ferris's title, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it does feel more about the day itself and everybody's involvement in it, because we've got what's going on with Ferris, we've got what's going on with Jeannie, we've got what's going on with his parents and all that, and we're just kind of jumping around a little bit, even though we're mostly on them, and of course, you know, whatever the hell Rooney's doing at the house, and looking for Ferris and all that. So with all that said, as far as there being memorable supporting characters in Charlie Bartlett, we're going to talk about Downey in a minute, and we've talked about Susan. So that just leaves some of his friends, like Len's a nice character, but he's, you know, just, you know, a funny side character. His and Charlie's friendship and the way they kind of immediately bond is nice, much to dismay of people around. And there's like Murph, and you know, Murph's arc is really good, and he's a funny character, and he ends up with Megan Park, I think her name is, which is, it's a nice subplot anyway to see the way Murph sort of transforms, but it's also especially nice that the two of them in real life have been together since this movie, and they're like married now. So that's really nice and everything, but while those characters are good as far as their supporting roles and just kind of doing their job as being funny side characters, I think about the fact that Charlie Bartlett doesn't really have a Cameron. And, like I said, in a way, we'll kind of touch on that, but a character like Cameron in Ferris Bueller is so incredibly valuable in a way that I don't know how many people really see if they haven't like really looked at the movie, because Ferris Bueller's Day Off just isn't what it is without Cameron, and I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that Alan Ruck gives like maybe one of my favorite supporting performances like ever, certainly in a comedy, but it's like I'm wondering, maybe ever actually. Because here's the thing about Cameron. Cameron is a whole can of worms to talk about with this, and that's why I love this character so much, and why he's my favorite part of the movie. Because with no Cameron in Ferris Bueller, the movie would still be fun, probably, because Matthew Broderick does carry it well, and his interactions with the audience and the other characters we see around, especially like with Rooney and stuff like that. It would still be a fun movie, but without Cameron, there would be zero emotional resonance. And I feel like the emotional resonance in this movie is what has kept it a classic. As I said, it's an extremely funny movie, and it's definitely fun. Like I said, that with those, especially the way John Hughes could do it. The way John Hughes would inject drama and like real situations and real people into his sometimes outlandish sort of stories. And Cameron's probably the best example of him doing that, and it's a strong resume of doing that that thing. But when you look at it, like take for instance the museum scene, the end of the museum scene, where we're cutting back and forth, and the peak of this little montage is this back and forth between Ferris and Sloane kissing in front of the stained glass, and Cameron looking at this painting very intently. And the thing about these two things is, even though Ferris is our main character and love stories can tend to take prominence in movies, nobody... I was trying to be nice to Sloane earlier, but if we're being totally honest, nobody cares about Ferris and Sloane's relationship, do they? So, yeah, they're kissing in front of the stained glass, but nobody's reacting to that. Everybody reacts to and everybody talks about Cameron looking at the painting. And it's because it can be confusing to people, but I think that's what's great about it. People see Cameron staring at that painting and they're like, what does this scene mean? Like, is it funny? Is it tragic? Is it sad? Like, what is it? And you can does he see himself in it? Does he see his relationship with his father? What is it? And people take that away from that. And it's Cameron just looking seemingly blankly. And that's what you can take away from this character. And as far as he and Ferris's relationship, where there is, and I'm talking about the serious nature and the emotional stuff that Cameron brings in. Not to mention that the scene where he kills the car is this incredible emotional payoff. He's also extremely funny. Also, even if it's at his expense, still. Like when he's laying in bed and he says, he's dying and stuff like that, and he's singing to himself. It's funny. Like this is a very depressed teenager in a very dark place. Yet he is somehow able to make that funny, but also we understand that because when we see him compared to Ferris, we, like Ferris, think Cameron might just being a drama queen at first. But then the more we learn about his life, the more it's like Cameron's in a very bad place. But there's still moments that are extremely funny. One of my favorites is when Ferris predicts that he's sitting in the car debating whether or not he's going to go out. And we see him war with himself. I especially love the shot that stays on in the car, and we watch him decide he's leaving, and then he decides to come back, and when he decides to come back, he gets mad because he's coming back. And this is all stuff that's out of focus through the back window, and it's perfect. Even just little tiny things, like, I notice a big reaction always comes from that popping noise that he makes during the, stockburger scene or whatever that is. The way he snaps when they come out of the restaurant, just really tiny things like that. But, yeah, another thing is his relationship with Ferris and how complete and total opposites they are, and basically the story feels less about Ferris's day off and more about Ferris bringing Cameron out of his shell, out of his depressing life, and giving him something to sort of live for the day. And this, I think, is why some fan theories have surfaced about the movie being more about Cameron than about Ferris. There's that thing that a lot of fan theories are like way off base and ridiculous for the sake of it, and they want movies to be as far away from what they actually are just to, feel like they're coming up with something clever or something. So there's the whole thing about, is Ferris just an imaginary friend of Cameron? That I hear, I don't know how many people have heard this, but I feel like it's made the rounds. That Ferris is actually an imaginary character and Cameron is the real character within this story. It makes no fucking sense, because we see the rest of his family's day, they're constantly referencing him. What would Sloane be doing here otherwise? Who is Sloane kissing all day? It's a really dumb theory, but it does have basis in something that makes sense, which is, I talked about Ferris and Cameron living very different lives and having very different personalities. And I feel like the movie is, you could say the movie's not completely set in the real world, but at least half of it is, and half of it kind of isn't, because I would buy it if you could say if Ferris is real, but Ferris also lives in a fantasy land because his life is just that easy to, because people like Ferris actually exist that coast through life that easily, facing no consequences whatsoever and doing whatever the fuck they want. Not to mention he's probably a rich kid because that's a big fucking house. So Ferris has been on Easy Street forever. So it almost feels like, to me, I'm not saying take this literally, I'm just saying, to me, I can see it as Ferris lives in a fantastical world that people like Cameron don't. And how they can still be best friends. Like, take for instance, like, one that really stands out is during the race home. If you want to talk again about how kind of pointless the Sloane storyline is, we have this whole moment where he runs by these sunbathing girls, and then he goes back to them and shakes their hand and introduces himself because they're hot and scantily clad. That's the joke. But the thing about it is, it doesn't really matter, because when we see that, we don't think about, oh, but he just said he and Sloane just talked about getting married. He just proposed to Sloane today. Now he's shaking hands with sunbathers because they look hot and introducing himself. Nobody and he's delaying his way home when there is the whole thing depends on this. Nobody thinks about the sunbather scene that way because it's just a gag. It's just a joke. And people take it that way. And that's the kind of world that Ferris lives in. He can stop the world for a joke. And nobody will think otherwise. That scene where he can literally stop the movie to make a joke is something we would never see Cameron do. Because Cameron lives in a different world. Cameron lives in this crushing reality. Another example I like to use for this is the car. And making the car go backwards, hoping it'll take the miles off. Where, first of all, the first time we hear that, the first reaction to it is Cameron laughing at him. Like, because that is so ridiculous. But the thing about it is, Ferris's life works out so easily for him all the time. If that Ferrari came from Ferris's world, that probably would have worked. But that Ferrari doesn't come from Ferris's world. It comes from the crushing reality that Cameron lives in. So it didn't work. So that's the direction I kind of like to take. Where, like I said, it's not something like supernatural in the movie or anything like that. But I could see John Hughes taking it as Ferris lives in a movie. He literally talks to the camera. Ferris lives inside of a movie, and he knows that he does. And Cameron is one of us. Cameron lives in this shit world. And that's why things don't go great for him. That's why he's depressed. That's why he doesn't get along with his parents. And he's not worshipped by his parents, because that's the kind of things that happen to people like Ferris, who might as well not even live in the same world as a normal person. So I almost feel like it's intentionally saying something like that. And the fact that Ferris also kind of seems to live in this satire of, like, popularity in high school, where people, talk so casually to him about, like, do you think you'll be alive this weekend? And it's like, John Hughes knows how to write real dialogue and real people talking, and we see it in the movie, mostly through Cameron. This isn't something somebody would say in this world. Like, this is something being said to somebody that lives in a movie. So, and like I said, this whole sort of big, like I said, satire on popularity, the whole Save Ferris movement that happens, where it's like, yeah, this is a movie that's not set in the social media age. Obviously, we're in 1986. So, it is the idea that people gather around this movement without even really knowing who Ferris is or what he even looks like actually does seem like something that might happen, although it's obviously a very exaggerated and satirical version of that, where people will just rally around something because of popularity, because the whole town is doing it, or whatever. So that's how I feel about that, as far as that. And as I said, Cameron lives in this world where there are consequences. There's debate about what happens when he waits for his dad to come home. After giving this fantastic and so beautifully written monologue, where he's just deciding to put his foot down and not let the world crush him and not let his dad, the love that his dad has for other things and not for him take over and make him feel the way that he feels and sort of come out of this depression in a way by facing the world head on. The world in this instance being his dad in particular, like his dad kind of being the face of everything that's wrong in Cameron's world, or at least the start of it, like the tip of the iceberg. So because Cameron lives in this world and not Ferris's world, I'm going to assume that did not go well at all. I love the fact that it ends on this sort of triumphant moment that Cameron's gonna do this, but I feel like it's very clear why it was done ambiguously of how it would turn out. Because, like I said, Cameron doesn't live in a fantasy world. Cameron doesn't really live in a movie. I mean, he's a character in a movie, but he doesn't live in the movie world that is the heightened reality that is the life of Ferris Bueller. That's for sure. So, yeah, but hopefully, once he moved out and maybe went to assuming he went to college and his dad didn't say, oh, you're going to work the rest of your life to pay off this car. Forget about college. That's something that could happen. Something very dark, but it doesn't affect the moment for me because Cameron's moment of triumph is... That's the point. That's the point Cameron needed to reach by the end of the movie, and he does. And that's the important thing, and that's what makes the car scene so strong and powerful. And it's a scene I could just watch over and over and over again because it's so well done, so well written, and Alan Ruck is just completely spot on in his performance throughout the whole thing, the comedy beats and the dramatic beats, and I could go on and on about it. So about Charlie Bartlett not having a character that's sort of comparable to Cameron, interestingly enough, I guess the closest we come would be Downey's character of the principal / Susan's dad, where he's struggling with his alcoholism and he hates his job and he's in this really sort of dark place at all times, much like Cameron, as far as being in a dark place. But he does have this really great relationship with Susan, this sort of surprising, sort of uncliche relationship with Susan, where they actually really like each other, they get along really well. I love his introduction scene when he comes into the house and she's on the phone and pretends to resent him, but that's just the thing that they do, where it's basically for her image, but she actually likes him and gets along well with him. And it kind of actually has these nice sort of, reminiscing moments with her. And it's clear that whatever happened with the mom has made their bond even stronger, where the mom, calls up and even says, my daughter won't talk to me and stuff like that, and she's angry with him. And so it's clear that they've got a good, strong relationship here. So that's something that I kind of like, is a bit different from the cliche of what you might expect when you think about these two characters, especially one being her being a student at the school that her dad is the principal for. But they get along nicely, and it's a nice relationship to see. And the chemistry between Dennings and Downey is great too. But what's also interesting about this is, obviously being the principal, he's going to also be comparable to Rooney. Maybe, but not really. I think it's weird how much more comparable he is to Cameron, but I do like, if you want to talk a comparison to Rooney, and the way Rooney is like this sort of cartoonish version of authority, the thing about it is Downey actually seems played up like this sort of humanized educator, where he's not blown up as this, tyrannical sort of authority figure throughout it, where he does his job, and he does it, it seems, as well as he can. Like, he's trying, but it's also clear that he hates the job, and it's the job that's kind of driving his soul into the ground. The problem that I have with this is that feels kind of vague. And his relationship with his ex-wife feels kind of vague, so we do see him in these really dark places, but we only get very surface level stuff about where it's coming from, and it's stuff that like seems to mostly happen off screen. So it's all in Downey's performance, which is great. But because I feel like there's so little to work with about where this character is coming from, it does feel like the big obvious. I feel like I'm stating the obvious here. Um, the strength of the performance and the soul of the performance is going to come from the fact that this is obviously a performance that hit way close to home. Where it's like when we see the pain in Downey's eyes as he's playing an alcoholic, that you can see how real of a place that it's coming from. Like even if you didn't know Downey's past, you would get the sense of this is clearly a territory that he's it feels like very lived in as far as this sort of despair that he's in, and like knowing the self-destructive nature of this despair, and just in general the being in his vices and how farther down this dark path that's taking him, that this job apparently has brought him to. Like I said, the movie doesn't seem to really go much into that. But the performance is absolutely there, but I do feel like all the gravity of that is coming from real life, rather than the material itself. So, while those scenes are extremely strong because of Downey, it does also feel like there's this emptiness from a story point. With like its contact with the rest of the story of the movie. It feels a bit empty, but like I said, when we're looking at the Downey scenes individually, the power is certainly there because of him and how he's able to portray that. So, obviously, quite different from the authority figure and that we get in Ferris Bueller with Rooney, where Rooney is pretty much strictly a comedy character. Like I said, this very over-the-top version of the determined principle. I love this detail that Rooney seems so consumed by his job, and maybe he's so consumed by Ferris Bueller himself, not just his job itself. Because clearly, he doesn't seem to mind putting his job in jeopardy. Going to Ferris's house and breaking in and knocking out the dog, doing all this stuff to catch his arch enemy, who is a high schooler. So, so you could go down this path that Rooney's this really pathetic character, but the way they play up his pathetic nature is interesting because it's not like it doesn't do it in like dramatic scenes. It does it by showing that Rooney just has no real way of communicating in a way that looks remotely human. Like there's two particular interactions here that play this up. There's the one when he walks outside with Sloane when they're waiting for her, in quotes, dad, and he says, "I had a grandmother once." Two, actually. And it's clear he has no way of interacting, like showing empathy or any kind of emotion whatsoever. It's just missing from his being, and that's probably why his existence is so hollow. He's able to consume himself with Ferris Bueller. The other one being this is kind of a 2-in-1. When he goes to that arcade and he mistakes that girl for Ferris and gets soda spit into his face. But then he goes and he talks to the guy at the counter and he says, what's the score? And the score is 0-0. And then he says, who's winning? And the guy's just baffled by this and just answers to fuck with him. And yeah, so it's clear that wherever Rooney is coming from, he doesn't have any sort of... he doesn't have an emotional core. He doesn't have some sort of... Like, when you look at somebody in this kind of position, you think, oh, they must have their work personality and then their outside of work personality. Rooney doesn't have that outside of work personality because this, like I said, just seeing his life consumed, he's just this empty, hollow person, which makes it even funnier, the continuous bad things that happen to him. There's even the great moment where Jeannie has an arc, when after he catches Ferris in that moment, and then she sticks it to him by saying that she caught him, she knows that he's the one that broke into the house, and then she throws his wallet and unintentionally wakes the dog up and makes it even worse for him. But what I love about this moment with Jeannie is that the way we set her up, where she turns around and she helps Ferris, and it's like, oh, was it Charlie Sheen? Maybe it implies maybe it was partially Charlie Sheen, maybe, but the thing about it is she doesn't. It doesn't feel like she blackmailed Rooney essentially for Ferris's sake. We build up that Jeannie probably just hates authority that much. And it's like Ferris just, once again, Ferris just got fucking lucky and just happened to get caught by Jeannie when Jeannie was in a state of, oh, I have a way to fuck over authority. That would be fantastic. and she takes that opportunity and she lets Ferris go. So I feel like that was perfectly set up for both of those characters, where, like I said, it's just the way they set Rooney up, it's satisfying to see him get shit on over and over again. Not only satisfying, but hilarious to see him get shit on over and over and over again. And how Jeannie's arc actually feels like it makes sense from multiple standpoints. So I like all that stuff too. So with all that said, I feel like another thing we can go into, which is kind of the next natural place to go here, is the conflicts in the two movies. As far as the conflict in Charlie Bartlett goes, a lot of it feels kind of forced after a while. Like, the first hour of Charlie Bartlett is fantastic, and there's not a whole lot I can say that would be negative or critical about it. Once Charlie Bartlett reaches the hour mark, I feel like it's a little too long. And I say that about a movie that's like an hour 30-something, like an hour 37, which isn't the best sign, and a lot of that comes from some pretty forced conflict. Like, the entire last 35 minutes or so is just conflict, and a lot of it feels... It's not like it's sudden, because we set up the security cameras thing early, we set up Kip and his, inevitable suicide attempt, that's all set up pretty early, but I feel like once Charlie decides to stop giving out drugs and helps and, has the reconnection with Kip after his suicide attempt, it feels like we're wrapping up. It feels like we're in a place and the characters are in a good enough place that we can at least start winding down a little bit. But there's a whole 1/3 of the movie left. And we get stuff like the play gets introduced, and that becomes a whole thing. It gets introduced in, like, when we're going to the third act, and then that becomes a whole conflict. We talked about how great the relationship is between Susan and Downey, and it's because it's his wife's name. But when we get to this point where Charlie buys her nicotine gum, and it's in this unidentifiable bag, and Downey thinks that it's drugs, and he goes out and he confronts him, leading to Charlie punching him, which leads to a whole other conflict. This scene is really stretching it. Where and I get it's the whole, he needs to trust Susan, and he needs to come over and let Charlie back onto his good side, because Charlie's learned his lesson, and he's trying to help people in a less illegal way. But to do this, to address these trust issues, Susan refuses, even if it would completely deflate this situation, diffuse this situation is probably the word I'm looking for, she does not tell him, oh, it's just nicotine gum. She lets this go on and on and on until Charlie punches him. And it sends us down a whole other conflicted path, just because it's that cliche of a character just won't tell another character a very simple piece of information that would stop a fight instantly. And then, like I said, a whole half an hour is born, and that has never really worked out much for me. I feel like that's kind of and by the time the security cameras thing comes back around, I feel like we've almost forgotten about it by that point. And it is the catalyst for, Downey eventually losing his job and taking that burden off of him that was making him depressed. But like I said, that was an underdeveloped thing anyway, that he hated his job. I don't. So the security camera thing feels excessive, even though it was introduced early. It still feels like it could be cut out because there's plenty of other conflicts to do here. Even as late as the play came in, if you want that to be, because that's the resolution, the unspoken resolution between Downey and Susan, but I don't know, it's just a lot going on in the last third, and it, like I said, when it felt like we were winding down, you really realize, like, man, this was a really strong movie, and then it just kind of keeps going, and the directions are more forced as they go, and yeah, I don't think it works out. It has a nice ending, like the idea of them reconciling, and that epilogue with Charlie and stuff like that. It ends nicely, but that sort of third act beginning like really took us down a lot of paths that felt unnecessary, and like it was dragging the movie out. That's not even the whole scene with Downey in the pool. Is a lot. So, for a character that feels underdeveloped and how he got to this point, the pool scene is a lot. But like the way Downey plays it saves it. But the fact of there even being conflict in Ferris Bueller because it's about a character that's just has lived such an easy life. Where you could say maybe Rooney's the conflict, but not really, because Rooney's just constantly failing, so he's not really a problem until the very moment they run into each other, which is very brief and ends quickly. So, yeah, the conflict comes from Cameron, so you could say, like, oh, does a conflict finally come in when he kills the car? And he has to decide how he's going to react to his dad. But, I guess the conflict throughout is Cameron's conflict with reality. Like, it's Cameron versus reality is what the conflict would be. As far as Ferris having a conflict, no, it's just not there. Because, like, think about this. You might think that that's a criticism, or you might think it's something that Ferris Bueller could use. But the thing about it is, that would just it would be too cliche of a thing to happen to Ferris Bueller, especially with the way he's been set up. Like, think about the fact, like, so Charlie gets caught, he gets, punished, he learns a lesson, and then he reforms, and then that whole thing happens. How fucking lame would it be if Ferris got caught and learned a lesson? Like, what would this movie be if that happened? Like, all this time I'm saying Ferris lives such an easy life, that's never been a complaint of the movie. Maybe, like, people living that life in real life and getting away with it, but no, as far as Ferris Bueller as a movie character, no, I don't want to see him learn a lesson. That's not... The whole point is that Ferris doesn't learn shit. He starts and ends the movie with the exact same line. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. He says it at the beginning, and he says it at the end, right as it's fading to black. Ferris did not learn jack shit. Because that's his life. That's always going to be his life. The idea was that Cameron is taking another direction in his life. Whether it's going to be harmful or helpful, we'll see, but we're hoping for helpful, and the movie leaves us on that ambiguity, and that's strong enough for me. So, that's... The fact that Sloane... One thing I'll give Sloane credit for in that whole storyline is it never causes conflict like most love stories kind of do. Like, it's kind of nice that Charlie and Susan don't really run into conflict, except, Downey saying, oh, you can't see each other. But the conflict isn't with them themselves as characters. They pretty much, once they fall in love, they're in love, and the relationship is great, and very supportive and helpful. Just Downey's kind of working his way into it. But it's not a conflict with their love, or between them, personally. Yeah, that's a good thing about the Sloane storyline, and the fact that there's no forced conflict. But, God, if you want to see forced conflict, the last third of Charlie Bartlett is laying it on a lot. But I don't want that to sound too negative, because Charlie Bartlett is a very good movie, and like I said, it's helped a lot by Anton Yelchin's just really effortless presence and his performance, Downey's really, really strong performance, especially coming from a really real place, and Kat Dennings' just endless charm and her chemistry with Yelchin, and how all of that plays out, and A lot of likable characters, a lot of nice arcs, some really great stuff in here. Like I said, just that third act has always kind of bothered me a little bit, but still, don't really hold much of anything against the movie at all, and it's one that I will definitely still continue to go back to because it's just such a like a feel good movie, despite some of the depressing nature of especially like Downey's arc. And sometimes they can go to dark places, but it's especially if you want to remember Anton Yelchin. I feel like this would be a go-to movie as well, just to show like how energetic and full of life he was, and he could bring that to a performance and stuff like that. It works so well. But when you're talking about putting up any movie, against Ferris Bueller, you think about, I was really struggling how I was even gonna condense what I had to say about Ferris Bueller enough to make this video reasonable. Because the more I was thinking about it, the more it was like, well, if I'm going to talk about Ferris Bueller and what I love about it, is that not just every single scene? Like, the word iconic is thrown around a lot. I kind of throw it around a lot, but I try to put it in appropriate places. I was trying to think, is there any scene in Ferris Bueller that is not just iconic and memorable? Like, is there one moment in Ferris Bueller where it's like, oh, I forgot about this part? I don't think, like, you could go down the line, every single scene, whether it be the parade, or the parking garage guys, or even little moments like when Rooney's running down the hallway, and he stops and walks when he passes by a door, and then he keeps running again, is probably one of my favorite visual gags in any comedy ever. Or even stuff like the way they introduce Grace without any words whatsoever. It's Rooney on the phone, and the camera's just lingering on Grace, and she's finding, like, pens and pencils in her hair that she clearly didn't know were there. Just little moments like that. But to go on, like, the Rooney stuff, Rooney trying to break into the house, the 9 times scene, just the opening scene in general when Ferris's big introduction, Cameron's introduction, the scene where they make the prank phone call to Rooney and they get Sloane out of school, even the nurse going to pull Sloane out of class, and the way the teachers are really boring, Ben Stein saying Bueller, like everything in this movie is iconic and memorable, and it's like the race home we talked about. There's even little moments like the way Ferris's dad reacts when that person runs the stop sign and he makes that gesture. The little tiny things you remember so specifically. Big scenes, small scenes, fleeting moments, everything. The singing telegram, everything with Jeannie, the Charlie Sheen scene. It's when she calls the police and screams at them. Like every single scene, one after the other. We mentioned the museum scene. Just everything. The stock market scene. It's just the restaurant scene. The Abe Froman stuff. It's all stuff you've heard quoted everywhere. And nobody misquotes the movie. Everybody knows the movie. Like, down to every last detail. It's insane how iconic and beloved and memorable, and now every single note hits, every single word, just everything hits right exactly where it's supposed to be, and has become this instantly recognizable thing in pop culture and movies in general. And it's, like I said, I felt bad putting anything up against it. But here we are. So that's how I feel about these. So tomorrow we're going to start a new segment, actually, and we'll see how that goes over. And you'll see what that is. So, and then we've got September and October is just going to be all... You're going to be so fucking sick of my face and my voice. Probably at least within the week, let alone in the next couple of months. But that's how we're doing this and how we're starting this fall. So until tomorrow, I think that's it.